I ran into a Christian on the subway the other day and we started talking. When he heard I was an atheist, he got all dramatic and said this to me. I have just one question for you. How can you be so sure that you are right?
Implying that, if you are wrong, you are risking hell.
Exactly.
Well, you know my feelings on that topic. I believe that God is just and merciful, and that the conventional view of hell is infinite and cruel and vindictive and entirely based on believing the wrong things is not what Jesus actually taught. We spent a whole video discussing that.
Right. Anyways, I responded. Well, I just have one question for you. How can you be so sure that you are right?
I see. And did a productive discussion follow?
No.
I am not surprised.
Well, even if you hold the Christian view, surely you must agree that the burden of proof is on the believer, not the non-believer. My opponent needs to answer my question about why he's sure, not the other way around.
No.
You don't put the burden of proof on me, do you? Don't give me any of that Pascal's wager nonsense.
Well, Pascal's wager is only nonsense if it is paraphrased poorly, which all too often it is. We've spoken about that already in another video. But no, I don't put the burden of proof on you either.
Then how are we to discuss religion intelligently at all? The burden of proof must be on someone.
I disagree. Burden of proof is on the prosecution in criminal law. In ordinary discussion, I suppose the burden of proof can be assumed voluntarily, if one really claims that what one is saying is provable. Nonetheless, in life we make decisions all the time regarding things that cannot be proven one way or the other.
Such as?
This morning I had to decide which road to take to work. Later in the day, I had to decide which of my children was responsible for the mess in the kitchen. At night, I had to decide if my friend was bluffing when he bet the maximum on his poker hand. In each of these cases, I had insufficient information to prove which alternative reality was true. But it was required that I form a belief, and act upon it.
Well, all of those situations are clearly uncertainty. But faith traffics in certainty. When someone says they believe in God, they mean they are certain about God's existence. Not that they believe it to be the most likely case.
That's not always true.
Well, if someone admitted to being uncertain, wouldn't you have to classify him as an agnostic?
No. An agnostic, in practice, is not just someone who is not certain, but also someone who refuses to take a position, or at least thinks they are not taking a position. I would submit that everyone reflects a degree of belief or unbelief in how they live their lives, even though almost everyone is uncertain about their beliefs. Even you. Would you admit some possibility that God exists?
Well, it must be very small in my opinion.
Does that make you technically an agnostic? If so, then why do you call yourself an atheist?
Because it is an important matter. One ought to take a stand, not try to have it both ways. Agnostics, from my perspective, deep down agree with atheists but are afraid to take an unpopular stand, and they like to draw upon some vague notion of God once in a while for comfort.
I think you are right about that in some cases. But in others, perhaps the agnostic deep down agrees with the believer but is afraid of commitment and not being his own boss, but, like you said, enjoys drawing upon a vague notion of God once in a while for comfort.
Interesting. Perhaps you and I agree on something. It's better to take a stand, even without certainty. But what bothers me about Christians is that they don't admit they have any uncertainty at all.
Some Christians probably are certain in their minds, if they have had a strong enough direct experience of God. However, I think many others will admit to some doubts, if you press the question directly and respectfully.
What about you?
Yes. I do struggle with doubt.
Struggle with doubt. Is that like saying that you are certain about the truth and sometimes fall short of feeling it emotionally?
No, I mean I really do feel uncertain of my beliefs, both intellectually and emotionally.
Then why call it a struggle?
Because faith is a virtue.
Why is faith a virtue? If doubt is honest, you shouldn't be held accountable for it. It's practically outside of your control.
To some extent I suppose it is. But not entirely perhaps. I think all of us are either cultivating faith or doubt by our choices in what to read, in how to spend our time, and in the habits we practice in the mind. To act as if one's faith is true has the effect of strengthening it over time, and vice versa.
Still, even if you can train your faith in this way, why is it right to do so? That presupposes the truth about God.
If one concludes that something is probably true, and that if it is true it is best to believe it wholeheartedly, then it is reasonable to train oneself in believing it. From your perspective, for example, suppose a man is mostly convinced that there is no God, but is in danger of slipping back into what you would label a superstition. Wouldn't you encourage him to build up his atheism through supportive reading and fellowship?
Yes, I suppose so.
Well, within Christianity, faith is a virtue, so if one comes to accept Christ, one should deliberately encourage not only one's own faith but the faith of one's neighbors. This is why, I think, many Christians who do have uncertainty about religious truths don't like to talk about it. Saying "I believe" in a bold tone that conveys certainty is more uplifting to one's compatriots in faith than saying it with the tentative sense one has when saying "I believe you are bluffing" or "I believe it shall be faster to take the highway today." To attempt to live even a little bit like Jesus called us to do is challenging, and we can use all the encouragement we can get. So this is perfectly sensible. Faith is a virtue because faith supports virtue. And it's not just a matter of my saying so. Jesus himself and all the New Testament writers held faith up as a virtue.
Why, then, are you letting down your guard with me?
In the hopes that you might see things in the new light. Perhaps you mistake the tone of certainty implied by Christian language as being an unwillingness to deal with intellectual reality. The bold tone that impressed the Roman world with its courage, or uplifts the broken-hearted inside a church, may not be effective in the modern media or in discussion with a skeptical friend.
Well, I appreciate the outreach, but I'm still very far from your position. And I still have a lot of unanswered questions.
Of course. Although if you go back over all of our videos so far, we were starting to whittle down the list of big questions. In any event, I'm mainly thinking that a Christian's willingness to acknowledge doubt will help reach some agnostics. The ones who really want to believe but can't muster up the certainty that they think is required. They should know that they will be welcomed as they are.
I wonder what various church authorities would think of your claim that certainty isn't required.
I suppose it varies. But my only authority on the matter is Jesus. People struggling with doubt have been part of his team from the beginning. Like the Apostle Thomas, who famously voiced his doubts in John's Gospel, but was healed of them, and went on to plant churches in India way back in the 1st century. Or the man who says to Jesus in Mark's Gospel, "I believe, help my unbelief," and has his request granted. Maybe God will see fit to remove my remaining doubts in this life. If not, I look forward to having them removed in the next.
And why would God not just end everyone's doubts with a dramatic appearance or solid proof of his existence?
Good question. But as you may recall, we discussed it at some length in another of our videos.